Hey everyone, thanks for listening to part one. This is part two. I'm going to go deeper into the themes, talk a little about what the underworld is, why one goes in the underworld, what that experience is, what one hopes to gain there, and what drives one into an underworld. And so I'm going to start with perhaps a couple anecdotes and just ideas around what it means to be Plutonic and some of the associations with that. And some of the descriptions of my channel, because this is a major theme. So the idea as I see it of the underworld or the Plutonic is a place where you find the riches of the soul. Oh, I just put my earplugs in. Hold on. Not earplugs, but headphones. Okay. Hope you guys can hear me clear right now. So the idea of the thematic mythological aspect of the underworld relates to a place where the riches of the soul are found. And that's why one's journey to the underworld is really one's own, meaning to say that you go down into the underworld to discern what is yours and what is not yours, and you only take of what is yours. The riches that one earns in the journey to the underworld are the gems of the soul, whether that's in your memory of what has transpired in this or other lifetimes, or just in your ancestry or genetics, however you want to look at it, as well as your experiences and all the emotions and all the different emotions you've absorbed or felt or experienced, and to discern what's yours and what's not yours. Essentially, that is the key to healing, is to separate what's yours and what is not yours, so that the self-identification can be renewed and reborn in a stronger light of discernment and sense of self. And this usually stems from the horror of the association of going to the underworld. And that means one's own hell. And many of us are driven to our own hell from our experiences. Maybe we were sick a lot as children and thus isolated. Maybe our parents isolated us in a world apart from other children, and we were lost in that hell. That was our hell. That was our underworld. But not so much an underworld, but a kind of stasis, a kind of space where, the treasures of who we are could not necessarily be found. They were like the early hell stages of just being isolated and controlled or manipulated or made to feel and absorb elements of judgment and emotions that were not you to begin with. And so the journey is a journey of discernment, a journey into the void to seek out perhaps some kind of lost seeming innocence. I don't know that there's a such thing as innocence. If indeed we have other simultaneous soul experiences, then innocence is somewhat illusory, but the sense of the innocent is very powerful. It's a very powerful idea and feeling. And so thus it has reality then. And and again, this is not just for people that have Pluto Sun aspects or least aspected Pluto in their charts. I mean, this could also be for the transit, people that experience transits in their lives as periods where they go into the underworld. And this also kind of relates to those with Pluto Venus aspects too, to some extent, Pluto Mercury, Pluto Sun. Well, this is about Pluto Sun. And so, but mainly here, the theme is the focal point of the personality of what one is, where their arrow of being is. And so then usually the big imprint, the big archetypal imprint is the helmet or mask of the major theme of the devil or the monster or the beast or the antichrist or Something very hideous and dark is the association that could be put onto this person, usually commonly held as black sheep in the family, or who the family projects on, all the dark aspects of the family line. This person usually gets um, taken over with all the projections. There's this great series that was on, I think it was on Netflix called Bloodline, and it was like a 4 or 5 season series about all these brothers and this family and this mother and father. And it was like very much a Shakespearean drama. And in the series, one of the sons embodies like this plutonic aspect. And his life is a struggle with addiction. And the brothers and the sisters, the whole series, they're trying to come to terms with what happened, something that happened in the past. What happened? Who did it happen to? What does that mean? How was dad involved? And it had to do with one of the sons. I guess the father broke his arm and beat him and broke his arm as a child. This is a child got his arm broken. And I guess everyone in the family just defended the patriarch and no one admitted what had happened. And they made up some fantasy story. But the truth was this boy got beaten badly by the father and his arm broken. And so this Plutonian son came to embody all the dark aspects of the family. He became an addict. He was up and down out of addiction. And the rest of the family all seemed to be, on brighter paths of success. And yet it was one of the older brothers, the one who seemingly shined the brightest, ended up drowning him to death. And thus, that specific son not only embodied the full archetype, but actually died as a sacrifice in the family, and therefore fully embodied the death and the rebirth of the family, which had to change after that. And so every other brother or sister had to make a choice whether to associate with him again or take his side. Or fascinating story, very Shakespearean, very, very much related to the work of um, these kind of ancestral or like family history, large family history dynamics, that occurred in Roman times, War of the Roses, especially in these elite families, and but also in the peasantry, in our own experiences, and that would be more so like Ernesto Sabato and other writers like that. But what I'm trying to connect with here is that there is usually a theme. Uh, this is a great book, by the way, that touches on these themes. This is Hades' Moon by Judy Hall, Pluto and Aspect to the Moon. And this is an astrology book that uses more the mythological astrologers, the modern psychological astrologers like Howard Sessioportis and Liv Green and others, where the focus is on mythology and psychology. But for the inspiration for this video is from a different author, and it was a Pluto Sun write-up. I don't have, oh, I have the book right there. And this is the book here. This is Aspects in Astrology by Sue Tompkins. Great write-ups on Pluto associations with aspects. Not sure if this is still in print. So going back to this major theme is that, and this is not always the case. Some Plutonians happily take on the identification of being a Darksider. Others struggle to be a Lightsider and thus hold to the Lightsider facade as strong as they can. And I don't mean facade like they perhaps are. But then what you'll notice with them is there's no fear in associating with the darker elements of society. Like they're still really comfortable. And this is a major Plutonian theme, is to be comfortable with the darker dregs and shadows of the social world, not shying away from association with, the more street or there's the shadow addiction um, areas of life, more dark side aspects of life. And there's a familiarity with that, there's a comfortability with that. We're all we all have our essence struggling to be seen and realized as we are. We all need our hellos, no matter where we are in our social strata of the world, even if we live on the streets or we live in, the highest mansion or building, like we all need to be seen. And those of us who have our humanity held at the strongest, it's more important because that in essence is an expression of being able to express who we are is, beyond our class, beyond our race, beyond our social stratification, our social identification is so important. There's a great song by a band called Warrior Soul called The Losers. Incredible song, incredible. Brings me to tears with ease as it discusses the nature of all areas of humanity and celebrates the beauty of that. And that very much is the Plutonian. The Plutonian is the celebration of the soul. So what the fuck does a successful or unsuccessful expression in the social world have to do with that? The soul needs to experience what it does, whatever that is. We all have different north nodes and south nodes. Who's to say success is a goal of every north node? Who's to say partnership is the goal of every north node? Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's being able to, the need to be on one's own, to be fully independent. Sometimes it's to learn to grow beyond success and riches of the world and to learn how to transform and be okay with that. Be okay with not knowing what's next or where the next meal is coming from, or not seeming to succeed as others do. And often this is the Plutonian fate. And what that is to understand that transformation, rebirth is more important than riches in the world, or the riches of the world, or the social riches of the world, because this is the riches of the soul. So what we're learning as Plutonians is how to integrate and balance both sides of the self instead of being overwhelmed by either end of the spectrum at the expense of the other side of the spectrum. And so again, this is, as Plutonians do, this is discerning what's yours and what's not yours. What feelings you have are yours, or just feelings that were absorbed from others in your childhood, known or unknown. And so the danger here is identifying with those feelings or adjectives or associations of the adults in the early life or the experiences. One could identify oneself as a destroyer again of some kind of archetype again of the devil, the monster, the evil person. What does that even mean? Someone who's beyond the rules of society, someone who's done horrible things to others, murder, destruction, um, an expression of lack of care. I mean, that's in the Plutonian history of people and our histories for sure. But there's also redemption, there's also realization, there's also understanding that maybe that's not who one wants to be anymore. And maybe they want to redeem those aspects of themselves and bring it to light and let go of what's no longer theirs in that sense, and to find the riches, the gems of the soul. and to realize compassion and authenticity, which is more powerful than love, right? To be who you are, no matter what the circumstance. That is love. That is love for the self. And so so the work here is involved around being very careful with how one identifies oneself. I like to use a dark identification for myself. Maybe it's a stylistic thing. Maybe I'm still very comfortable with my Plutonian attributes because it gives me the space, the solitary space that I need and crave and celebrate. And there are key attributes to being a Plutonian. There's like willpower. These are people that have immense willpower. Um, these are people that could be into power. And so, but wielding power, of course, you want to wield power in such a way that is supportive of others. But there could be a real like need to display or to wield power. And and if you wield power too strongly, because the ego can't handle wielding power, if you don't hold it for the masses, if you don't hold it on a high frequency for high purposes, then it'll just send you back to the underworld. Very much a Plutonian theme, the back and forth. And the polarity of this is being overwhelmed by others in power or feeling overwhelmed when having to deal with others that have power. The nature of sabotage could be related to sabotage of success, not allowing themselves to fully shine in the world because it doesn't feel right. It doesn't make sense. They're associated with the lowly, with the dregs, with the darkness, the shadows. So how could they be in the light? How could they be successful? Well, it's important to have success and not sabotage by, again, over-identifying with the dark aspects of what it is to be a Plutonian. I think it was Andrew, there's a quote by Andrew Chumley, something like he who has the greatest shadow holds the brightest light. And Andrew Chumley was a esoteric sorcerer, mage, who died at 37 of an asthma attack. It was much more than that occurred, but not too many people go into that, and I'm not going to go into that either. Uh, these are people that are very intense in the sense that, there's like an X-ray ability to pinpoint things in another person because they can see their own demons because they can X-ray into themselves and see their own like hell. They can easily see the hell of others. The well-developed Plutonians who are I shouldn't say well-developed, I mean, who can utilize, I guess, their talents for healing into discerning for others, they can see, the dark side of others. If others aren't expressing their dark side, they could see into those shadows. But, as the cliche is, you bring the shadows into the light to be obliterated, to be authenticized, authenticated into and integrated into the self. These are aspects where dark histories can be learned from and overcome, and thus fully integrated into the personality. So the personality is aware, I've been through this, I've been through that, but I've overcome that. I'm no longer a victim of that. I'm no longer a victim or a victimizer, but a victor. I know that sounds so cliche, but a victor in the sense not over anyone else, not over some war of destroying others, but over oneself. The highest frequency of expression is not competition with others or winning a battle in competition with another. It's with a battle with yourself. It's over becoming your lower self. That's the real goal. That's where the goal, that's where the real gems are. The real riches of the underworld are, is going through your rebirth and coming out to be a higher possibility of yourself. And so along, there's some other themes that can come with this that also tend to need to be rebirthed and, re realized, especially in humility. Um, is there's tests of patience, tests of pride, um, over seriousness, taking life too serious. So these are all things that must be tested and must be transformed. One must learn to be patient and experience beingness, the nature of timelessness in life. The realization that time and space, that there's no real difference between the two. We live in a type of beingness where we live under the illusion of time and space. Another aspect could be pride, as I noted, being prideful of one's depth or one's intensity or one's darkness or one's lightness. And it could be like a pride also in perfection or in great power over others, domination over others. This is all control over others. This is a big Plutonian mistake. And it's just imitation of the abuser. It's just if you were abused, we experience abuse in three ways. We either become the abuser and start to abuse for ourselves, or we either learn to abuse ourselves, or we attract people that will abuse us. Those are the three possibilities of Plutonian abuse that one may experience growing up. And so the solutions are here is to learn to allow for imperfections and to cultivate humility. Hey, a lot of Plutonians are so fragmented, so stifled as early souls expressing themselves in bodies that they create altars. These altars are very narcissistic and come to be associated with the dominant personality. And so one must learn to cultivate humility and say, hey, I'm a narcissist, but perhaps I'm a humble narcissist, doing the best I can to cultivate care and compassion for others as well as myself. Now, Pluto is something that cannot be wielded by one's ego. It's a very powerful force, and thus it is usually associated with the left-hand path. In fantasy, it's associated with Darth Vader, and Sauron in Lord of the Rings, or, endless villains, the Joker, right? Endless villains who bring chaos. And one must not forget that the Plutonian villain is also the hero of society. The hero in the sense that it's the only character that has the courage to point out the hypocrisies of the world and who takes the real pathway to the abyss, to the underworld, in order to bring the riches of authentic truth that no one else wants to look at. And yet, once society adopts it, forgets who brought the truth. It forgets where it came from. And so that truth becomes mainstream, and everyone assumes that, oh, that was always true. When really it's the Plutonians that go to the underworld to bring it to the surface. And this is an important journey. And so the real solution here for Plutonians who suffer over association with the darker elements of themselves, society, and their experiences, the real solution is sometimes to take on a career, to work in situations that help others to legitimately and consciously utilize their power to assist and support and transform the lives of others. And so essentially, this is a healing practice that a lot of Plutonians look for at some point. And there's many variations of this. You can heal through art, you can heal through coaching or some kind of therapy or some kind of astrology or tarot reading or attachment theory, whatever it is, like just sharing your own experiences and experiences of others. And in essence, what I'm doing here, relating on some account my own personal experiences of this aspect. Another aspect of this is seriousness, taking life too seriously. There's always an edge to some Plutonians. There could be an extreme level of maybe dark humor, the expression of it reminds me of the comedian Norm Macdonald, who could say what no other comedian could say. And yet his comedy was hilarious because of that point alone, because he would address very Plutonian themes that no one else would touch. And yet he would express it with like this mischievous grin, as if he was a child saying something he shouldn't say, waiting to be punished. Very fun comedian, very interesting. He expressed a lot of shadow aspects and he paid the price for it. He had his time in the underworld. He was, well, I mean, some people would argue that these Hollywood actors really have times in the underworld. I guess he was on SNL for a while and he kept saying something about a certain athlete and they finally just fired him. And, that was a dark night of the soul for him. He had to kind of create his own way after that, which is a very Plutonian thing. I hope you guys found this helpful. I hope I don't go off too much. This is an aspect I felt comfortable to talk about at length and to create a part two of and more parts in the future because a lot of Plutonians suffer and they forget and they remember and they forget and they remember that it's too easy to forget, and to allow oneself to associate oneself with these dark identifications from their early experiences. And that's not who they are. That's not who we are. Redemption is it's a part of transformation, re-realizing and rebirthing ourselves and how we choose to see ourselves and feel about ourselves. And this can mean from time to time taking a slip and falling backwards through self-sabotage into the underworld, into these worlds of addiction and poverty and isolation and pain and regret and voidness, where beingness can be found, where lost innocence can be once again apprehended, especially in the sense of finding the inner child there in the hell and taking that inner child by the hand and leading them somewhere else. Because for all of us, our inner child is still there in that hell. And so a lot of the work is to bring that child back from out of that and let it know that it's being nurtured now, that it wasn't left behind. And that is the real key to healing a lot of the trauma of the underworld. And it relates back to what I've been saying, which is discerning who you are and who you're not. Okay, hopefully that was helpful to all of you. And thank you so much for watching and listening. Maybe I'll do a part three at some point, but for now, two parts is where we're at.